Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. Kiro Chudomirovich Flins, or Flins for short, is the newest 5-star Electro DPS character coming in Genshin Impact version Lunar 1. In today's video, we'll take a look at just how Flinsane Flins is at Constellation 0 and with various weapons. Flins marks an interesting point in Genshin Impact because he is our first lunar damage based main DPS character. And what's also really interesting about Flins is that we are moving away from the dinosaur infested Flintstones era of Natlin to visit Flins's stones, as he would say, to visit his grave.
You're always welcome to come visit my grave.
What is up with every Electro 5-star male DPS character and their peak humor? And I have a couple very important questions, but the first one, is Flins an orphan? Because if he is, then this looks like a family reunion. Because what can we say? People are just dying to get in. Another really interesting thing about Flins is that he actually cannot plunge attack while he's in his elemental skill infusion state. So if you were looking to, well, save him from gravity, well, now we're actually visiting his grave.
Visit my grave.
Unfortunately, from an overworld and exploration perspective, the best he can do for overworld traversal is to take advantage of his long legs and higher running speed as a tall male model. But utilizing feet in today's day and age and yabba dabba doing around is some Flintstones technology. Now, while Flins may not have any built-in exploration capabilities, he does have the exploration capability of locating various Nodcry specialty items. Like, for example, he's able to help us find these giant, succulent Nodcry balls. And one last little detail about Flins, I promise. What do these three characters all have in common? That's right, they are all haunted by ghosts. And I will have to say that despite as menacing as Flins's ghost looks, I'd say Hu Tao's ghost is definitely the most dangerous, because you do not want to have cryo on yourself when you get slapped by that thing. Now let's take a look at his build really quick. For his weapon, he's using the new craftable Prospector shovel at Refinement 5, but I'll also show him off with his signature weapon, the Bloodsoaked Ruins, as well as a couple others. For his artifacts, he's using the 4-piece Knights of the Skies Unveiling with an attack percent timepiece, attack percent goblet, and crit circlet. He is, of course, at Constellation 0 throughout this video, and his talents are at 8, 9, and 9. And you do not need to level his basic attacks. And if you are planning to pull for Flins, well, here are his materials. Just go beat up on Aino's poor little knuckle-duckle robot, then pick some flowers, and finally, I think these are robot bits. Then we have his weapon, if you're going to go for that. We have these things. This is the weapon material. Then we've got these two monster bits. And Flinnily, for his talents, we've got these talent books, these weekly bosses, and these crowns, all for our King Flins. And if you're as hyped as I am for... then there's a newish hype button on YouTube. Just hit that like button down below, and then there's a hype button that sometimes appears. And you can smash that to show how hyped you are for Nodcry as well. This video was filmed on the early access server and is not indicative of the final product. There may be some changes on release, so be sure to check the comments down below to see if there are any. And here's an exclusive 60 Primogems code for you all because you liked and subscribed. Just check the description for a link to it and or the code itself. And with all that fluff out of the way, we can Flinnily move on to his basic attacks. I'm not even going to try to say that, Demon Spear. Surprisingly, Flin's unenhanced Flinsic attacks do Flin significant damage. But before moving on to the Flinsane parts of his kit, we need to briefly talk about Lunar Charged. So what the heck is Lunar Charged? There are actually two types of Lunar Charged damage to talk about. There's the Lunar Charged reaction and Lunar Charged direct damage. Let's start with the Lunar Charged reaction. With Flins on the team, every time Electro and Hydro hook up, Electro Charged gets yeeted and replaced by its much more fabulous older sister, Lunar Charged, italicized with gradient filling, trademark pending. Now, with 200% more branding awareness, it summons an emo-depressed thundercloud over the enemy's head and zaps them every 2 seconds if they're still wet and shocked, just like me seeing Ayaka's dance. Now, let's break it down in the simplest way possible without causing further brain damage. Like Electro Charged, Lunar Charged scales off of character level, elemental mastery, resistance, and it also ignores defense. But here's the plot twist. Lunar Charged can crit, so now RNGesus has entered the world of transformative reactions. But hold onto your neurons because it gets dumber, smarter. Instead of just taking the last Electro or Hydro applier, Lunar Charge throws a group project at your whole party, and damage gets calculated based on everyone who contributed Hydro and Electro, and not equally either. The top damage dealer gets full credit, second place gets 50% of their damage, and third and fourth place gets 1/12. But here's the kicker, despite all this chaos, Lunar Charged still killed the Regisvine in the exact same time as regular Electro Charged. So yeah, the reaction itself is a side grade, but it's a fabulous looking side grade. It kills with style, and most importantly, it kills with more readability. For Lunar Charge direct damage, you gotta take the multiplier and multiply it by whatever stat it scales off of, like in Flins' case, attack. Otherwise, it is quite similar to the Lunar Charged reaction damage, scaling off of elemental mastery, resistance, and crit, and ignoring the defense multiplier and bonus damage multiplier. However, what's really weird about Lunar Charge direct damage is that there is a hidden 3x multiplier for no apparent reason. And now that we understand Lunar Charged, we can move on and talk about his elemental skill, Ancient Rite Arcane Light, which infuses his basic attacks to deal electro damage for 10 seconds. Okay, this is just adding Flynn Soul to Flingery, as even his Electro Flynn fused basics are doing Flynn significant damage.
Stop it. Get some help.
At this rate, instead of actually dealing damage, he's only going to be useful for finding and slurping those plump Nodcry balls. So how does Flins actually do damage? Well, after you use his elemental skill, Ancient Rite Arcane Light, Flins can use his other elemental skill during his infusion, elemental skill, Northland Spearstorm. Using Northland Spearstorm now gives him access to his mini burst, which costs 30 energy and deals an instance of Lunar Charged damage. Since Northland Spearstorm has a 6-second cooldown, Flins can cast this twice during his elemental skill infusion window. Okay, this still isn't very impressive.
Ooh, that's kind of small.
So let's take it to the next level by having Hydro on the enemy. Yep, with a Lunar Charged Thunderstorm nearby as well as Ascendant Gleam activated, a second instance of Lunar Charge damage will smite the enemy, doing a flintastic amount of damage. With just a tiny bit of Ino's health, he was able to one-shot our Regisvine friend. He didn't even need to use his second mini burst to take it out. Now you've heard me yap a lot about his mini burst, thus implying that he has a mega burst, and yes he does. By spending all of his 80 energy at once, Flins is able to perform his Mega Burst, which does a pretty decent amount of damage, but less damage than 2 of his mini bursts. Generally speaking, Flins' mini bursts tend to be the way to go, but there are some mega rotations where he can utilize his Mega Burst. And if you're confused about me mentioning Ascendant Gleam, well what the heck is that? Let's briefly talk about Moonsign, another new Nodcry mechanic. Basically, many of the Nodcry characters have a passive that provides 1 Moonsign level. With 1 Moonsign character in your party, you get Nascent Gleam. And with 2 Moonsign characters, you get Ascendant Gleam and Nascent Gleam. Various artifacts, weapons, and characters have effects based on whether you have Nascent and or Ascendant Gleam. Finally, non-Moonsign characters also feel like they can contribute because they provide a buff to lunar reactions if you have Ascendant Gleam active. Okay, now we can finally tie all this back to Flins. Since the second Lunar Charged hit on his mini burst doesn't even activate unless Ascendant Gleam is active, he's frankly barely even a character without that second hit, thanks to the additional Lunar Charged strike due to Ascendant Gleam and all the other buffs that Ascendant Gleam provides. I know what you're thinking by simply having Ino on the party to provide Ascendant Gleam, now his mini burst is dealing literally 3 times the damage with Ascendant Gleam in comparison to Nascent Gleam. This issue is also prevalent, although not as crucial, for his Mega Burst as well. His Mega Burst gains 2 additional small lightning strikes with Ascendant Gleam. In this example, his burst did 45% more damage thanks to Ascendant Gleam. In short, Flins gains the following from Ascendant Gleam. He gains 2 extra mini zaps on his Mega Burst, he gains 1 huge zap on his mini burst, he gains the Team Lunar damage buff from Ascendant Gleam from non-moon sign characters, he gains 15% crit rate and 10% lunar damage from the 4-piece Knights of the Skies Unveiling. He gains 20% Lunar Charged damage from his passive, and he gains 24% Lunar Charged damage from the Prospector Shovel if he's using that. Now, all that yapping is admittingly quite complicated, but we can actually make this very flimple. Basically, on every Flins team, there should be another moon sign character and the ability to apply Hydro onto the enemy. Now, of course, Flins has a bunch of passives as well, so let's rattle through them. His first passive gives him 20% Lunar Charge damage when your team has Ascendant Gleam. His second passive gives him Elemental Mastery scaling based on 8% of his attack stat, capping out at 160 EM or at 2000 of Flins' attack stat. And his third passive enables Lunar Charged, which replaces Electro Charged and improves the base multiplier of Flins' Lunar Charge damage by 14% at 2000 attack. Phew, we're finally finished with all that yapping. Let's smite these flinsolent fools with Flins' full kit. With just a bit of Hydro on the enemy, as mentioned earlier, Flins' standard rotation is able to output 2 mini bursts. And this is already a pretty impressive amount of damage from his standard 2 mini burst rotation, where he only needs 60 energy for this rotation. And as we can see, almost all of Flins' damage comes from his mini Q zaps, with a bit of it also coming from the Lunar Charge reaction, and finally a very small amount of his damage coming from the direct electro damage that he does. Alternatively, Flins can flinflate his damage with his Mega Rotation. This rotation costs 140 energy and incorporates his Mega Burst along with 2 mini bursts. This extra flexibility is Flins-tastic, and in high energy scenarios, Flins is able to keep up with damage flinflation with this mega combo. With certain teammates and/or certain weapons and energy recharge stats, he can definitely open up many fights with this and perform this rotation when he does have enough energy. So unlike a character like Verissa who doesn't really utilize her Mega Burst, Flins is more like Skirk in this regard, where he can actually incorporate it some of the times, which is absolutely great. Now, I'm sure many of you are also Flins-quisitive about his weapon performance, and with and without Ineffa. Starting off with a quick comparison between his free-to-play shovel and his signature weapon. Between his obsession with free shovels and an expensive lantern on a stick, the biggest Lunar Charge damage here only did 8% more damage. Now, this definitely doesn't seem like much additional damage, because I'm not factoring in the additional crit rate, and right here this number is just for the largest Lunar Charge damage that we saw. But admittingly, because Flins only needs to crit 4 times with his mini Q hits, you can pragmatically crit fish, shovel, whatever with the Prospector Shovel. And also for his signature toothpick, I wasn't able to shift around artifacts to lower his energy recharge stat for more crit attack and elemental mastery rolls due to, well, what artifacts I have available. So in theory, his signature weapon is much better, but in this specific example it wasn't much better, especially if you're willing to crit fish a bit with his free-to-play friendly shovel. Anyway, full calcs will as always be available in the upcoming Flins guides, so stay tuned for that. Next we have a quick comparison with and without everyone's favorite robot, the Ineffa dispenser, Brigitte. By simply replacing Favonius Fischl with Favonius Brigitte, now Flins was able to single cycle our Kongomoto friend. Granted, maybe with the stringless and a better build on Fischl, that might have been barely achievable for Fischl, but regardless, Ineffa is a fantastic buff for Flins. Ineffa increases the base multiplier of Lunar Charged by 14% and provides a very substantial elemental mastery buff to Flins as well. In this example, Flins dealt nearly 20% more damage with his largest Lunar Charged hit, and with Ineffa's superior personal damage in comparison to Fischl, Flins was able to comfortably one-cycle our green pudgy friend. Who'd have thunk that, lore-wise I guess, a robot and a graveyard man would make a great team, but hey, they're sure to flinish off their enemies and put them 6 feet under. We finally made it to the Flins showcases, and starting with this free-to-play friendly team, and this is going to be a pretty solid team, although it does have one major weakness. It does not have a proper healer. You could of course run prototype Amber on Sucrose, but I do like the Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers on Flins a lot. One thing to keep in mind though about the Thrilling Tales is that the buff pretty much only comes up every other rotation, because Flins' rotations are quite short thanks to his short elemental skill cooldown, which also, I know happens to match perfectly well with it. And we also have this team, which is pretty fun, because I like this team because it gives some very large Lunar Charged damage numbers from Flins, which, you know me, big numbers always feel good. And there we go, just over 300k for a pretty free-to-play friendly-ish setup. Iansan is at Constellation 6, but that doesn't really matter too much. Constellation 2 is the big one for Flins, and when Flins jumps up in the air and then comes back down, it also counts as movement speed, which is a nice little bonus. And get me out of the kitchen for this one, because guess what? Another new character means another buff for Neuvillette, and this team is pretty fun in my opinion, although I'm not really quite sure how good it is. But what we can do here is we can actually utilize a little trick called Hydro Infusion on Kazuha's Elemental Burst. And with something like his, for example, signature weapon to help with energy management, then we are able to run a dual DPS setup with this, with the Hydro Infusion on Kazuha's Burst. Of course, you can either extend Flins' rotation and stay on field with him longer, or you can pop on Neuvillette in order to start doing his stuff. Is it good? Probably not, but it might be decent for example, situations where you need a double DPS setup, like that Aeon Blight Drake. Now, this next team is the Ineffa team, which I would say is overall one of his best teams on his release, amplifying his damage by a very significant amount. Of course, Ineffa is a fantastic teammate, both boosting his damage with the Element Mastery bonus as well as the Lunar Charged multiplier increase. And as we can see, this is one of the few more free-to-play friendly setups where Flins is able to one-cycle the Kongomoto here. Now, this next team is going to be a Infinite Energy team with Favonius Lance. And what's cool about this is that I think with a bit more energy recharge and or some specific rotations or something, you can probably actually do the super mega rotation each time with the Favonius Lance. And does that actually make up for the damage loss of the Favonius? It's really hard to say. Now, unfortunately for other Hydro characters, whether it's Xilonen or Fiorina, none of them really felt very good, whether it's due to their much longer cooldowns or just due to the fact that they don't really amplify damage at all in comparison to, for example, Ino. Where Ino doesn't really amplify much damage unless she's at Constellation 1 or Constellation 6. Her rotations are shorter too, allowing her to better support Flins in my opinion. So yeah, unfortunately when it comes to those other Hydra characters, it's not fantastic. Now, this next team is really interesting. It is overloaded and it is only against enemies that have an innate Hydra aura, or if you're able to, reasonably get Hydra auras on enemies through the enemy condition. So yeah, this team will do a ton of damage, but the issue is you can only use it against a couple enemies. And up next, we have a Flins Nuke Showcase. And this one, I'm actually using the Prospector Drill as well as no Hydro. And the reason for this is because otherwise the 4 lightning strikes from the burst actually kill the boss. In this case, we only get 2 lightning strikes, which allows the third one to actually hit the enemy and finish off the boss. Now, this next showcase is more of a proof of concept showcase where you can just mix and match your Electro and Hydra or Animo characters as needed. You could swap out Ino as well if you have Ineffa on the team. But as we can see, we can use the Deathmatch, which is also a very solid weapon. You don't need to invest into the Prospector Shovel, assuming you have the Deathmatch. As well as, for example, Kuki if you need a healer, as well as Lanyan if you want the Quality of Life and Shield, as well as the Thrilling Tales buff. Needless to say, of course, this team's going to do less damage than, for example, Fischl as well as Sucrose, but mix and match as needed. Now, I've got a decent amount of stuff to yap about, so I figured I'd yap for a bit while I show you guys an Abyss 12 showcase that's pretty free-to-play friendly, all things considered. And we've got Flins here, of course, with the usual build. We've got Fischl with a reasonable Noblesse Oblige build. And the reason why she's on Noblesse is because, unfortunately, I did not have a good tenacity set on the server. But Noblesse ends up working out quite well because Fischl, you know, can use her burst quite frequently. Then we have Sucrose on the typical build, and we have Aino on a Favonius build, and she is still at Constellation 0 in this specific showcase. And yeah, so going on into this Abyss 12, it's going to be very Lunar Charged friendly. Obviously, you know, it's shilling the newest mechanic, no surprise. But what's really cool here is that we are able to have many situations where Flins does have the energy in order to perform the Mega Rotation. And the Mega Rotation is actually going to be more flexible even than, for example, Skirk, because in his case, if there are situations where he just gets a bunch of energy from the fight, like enemies are dropping it or whatever it might be, then he can just use his Mega Burst in between his other stuff, which is really, really cool. That's one design aspect of Flins that I really like. I think they dropped the ball with that on Varissa, in that she can't really utilize her burst because, yeah, it doesn't really do anything. Whereas in Flins' case, when you actually do have the energy, you can just use it, which is really fantastic. So yeah, and we can see we are also running no healer, and these new enemies, I mean, these are super shilling. I think like Ascendant, Gleam, enhanced abilities, which I don't actually fully know the mechanics for, so I'm not gonna comment too much on that. But yeah, obviously Flins is going to absolutely decimate the new Abyss 12 that's going to be designed, tailor-made for him. But still, these clear times are very impressive. And one great thing about Flins is that he feels very powerful at free-to-play friendly levels. Is Ineffa better for him? Yes, she is, but yeah. And one really interesting thing about Flins as well is that, for example, you know, while you're farming for artifacts and stuff, you can actually use characters like, for example, Furina, but the bonus damage barely buffs his damage at all, like at all, because the reality is that it only buffs the raw electro portion of his damage, which is like, what, 13% of his damage output, somewhere between 10 and 15% of his damage output, which is obviously very, very pathetic. So definitely not, for example, utilizing a character like Furina to her fullest. And of course, you know, when it comes to current animo characters, basically none of them really compare to Sucrose, because Sucrose obviously providing the massive elemental mastery buff and Thrilling Tales buff. So yeah, Flins, in my opinion, though, feels like a very, very fantastic character. Personally, I really, really like the way he plays, he feels, and all this stuff, and the fact that he has these free-to-play accessible teams just makes him even better in my opinion. Overall, Flins is shaping up to be an extremely fun and rewarding character to play. There are also many details I didn't manage to get into this video, such as his particle generation and additional energy management tricks, like for example, perhaps certain combos will more consistently generate 5 particles versus 4 particles to help enable more mega rotations. And that's the thing, although he's a fairly flimbolt character to use, there is a lot of room for optimization, as he does gain additional damage in some situations with more energy. And the fact that, well, everyone gets Aino for free, well, he comes with one of his best free-to-play friendly supports right out of the box. Flins' rotations are also uniquely short, and this is another brilliant way to make him work better with certain characters like the, well, super short cooldown Aino. I also believe there is a good chance that Flins will continue to improve, perhaps with the release of some supports that can better support him, like potentially Columbina on the Hydro side, or maybe even other characters. Overall, I think Flins is flintastic, and he's an absolute beast of a DPS character who is both easy to use and rewarding to play. Let me know if you plan to pull for Flins or not. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Want to Lose, signing out.